I was chained. I don't know exactly why I was chained.
Okay, what has been your experience in 2 years of being
Very hectic. Since I was in military school, I've not seen anything like this.
In 2019, the attention of the Nigerian police force was caught by some local residents on a report of some very suspicious activity going on in a certain remote location in the northern part of the country. The police forces would make their way to the location, and what they discovered would reveal a horrifying reality, to say the least. Nigeria, easily regarded as the largest country in Africa in terms of both population and economy, is made up of 36 official states and divided into 2 protectorates, the Northern and Southern Protectorate. In a country with over 250 ethnic groups and over 500 spoken languages, there are bound to be differences, whether it be in terms of food, culture, tradition, clothing, or family orientation. With the exception of politics, one other major factor that always seems to cause division and separation between the 3 major ethnic groups present is the religious belief. The Southerners being predominantly Christians or believers of other indigenous or traditional religions, while some fraction of the ethnic group from the southern part of the country are either Christians, Muslims, or worshippers of other traditional religions. But the vast majority of the Muslim population are found in the northern part of the country, a region where the Islamic religion is strictly practiced to the core. There are even Islamic schools, also known as the Almajirancis, dedicated to solely teaching its students the holy book called the Quran, all of whom believe in a supreme being called Allah. The extreme religious practitioners had also gone to form their group with the political aim of achieving an Islamic state, such as the case with the notorious Boko Haram, now seen as a terrorist group since they are known for their brutal torture and killing of innocent civilians. And this is not excluding the Nigerian military personnel or government officials whom are also targeted. Within northern Nigeria, since the introduction of Islamic education, there have been over 30,000 of such private Islamic boarding schools, and these Almajirancis are also common, especially due to the fact that unlike private learning schools, these are the only affordable educational institutions accessible to over 11 million children since before and after the early to mid-2000s. And these are mostly those whose parents are really struggling financially and economically. And apart from having little progress in terms of promoting secular education, the government services are often lacking in providing infrastructures to enhance all types of learning. You see, the sole purpose of these Quranic schools is to teach students the Islamic studies, which mostly include prayers, worship of their God Allah, and also recitation of the Quran. These institutions are said to be mostly known to contribute significantly to education and character development while promoting Islamic values. However, not all of these private Islamic schools are what it appears to be. Within the northern part of the country takes us to one of the states known as Kaduna State. Within Kaduna State is an Islamic boarding school in an area known as Rigasa, where more than 500 students live within, completely separated from the outside world for some years, all within the 4 walls of the school. One of the boarding houses, called Daru Imam Ahmad, has been operating since the early 2000s in Kaduna State. The students who had been enrolled into the boarding house were normally brought in by their families to learn the Holy Quran or to be rehabilitated from either drug abuse or other sorts of mental illnesses, or for those delinquents who engage in petty crimes and all sorts of violent or antisocial behaviors, or for both reasons. Hence, most of the Islamic schools also serve these 2 purposes, other than just, acquiring the Islamic knowledge. At the time, as was the rule in the Daru Imam Ahmad Islamic School, the parents of the students were only allowed to visit their children every 3 months. Now, the private areas were mostly out of bounds to visitors or outsiders, and hence, the parents were never allowed into the inner houses or dormitories. Their kids were only brought to them outside the four walls of the school to meet them. The same scenario also applied to the older ones who had other relatives. The parents are also rarely allowed to speak to their children while they are the centers, and if they were to speak, it had to be under constant supervision by the guards. Every visiting day when parents do gather to see their kids, some of them had noticed that these kids all look subdued. They looked kind of silenced, which supposedly indicated to most parents that these children were not just being taught the Quran, but they were also showing signs of being properly controlled, especially for the delinquents within the bunch. As was expected, instilling the Islamic beliefs and the daily worship of Allah and the recitation of the Quran verses was now their everyday norm. Right? So we thought. On the 26th of September 2019, the Nigerian police authorities in Kaduna State was sent a tip-off from the local resident who was a relative of one of the students and who wanted to remain anonymous. According to the person, a suspicious activity was suspected within the Darul Imam Islamic boarding school. Something horrific and gruesome was said to be happening within the four walls. Something extremely vile, to say the least. The Kaduna police forces would make their way to the local community in Regasa, where they had no option but to investigate for themselves. On arrival at the scene, the authorities in charge of the Islamic school wouldn't allow for questions or investigations to be carried out around their premises, but that meant the police forces had to apply force to get their answers. And what they discovered next would reveal a dirty, shocking reality. On forcefully entering within the four walls of the shabby-looking premises, the environment, which appears to be in a very dirty condition of living, would prove to be actually better than what these Islamic students had passed through, ranging from over the past few years to months after each of them had been enrolled into the institution. Already in the school, the authorities had discovered students chained, hung from the ceiling, and some beaten in a torture chamber inside the school. Further shocking images from the Islamic school showed rows of about 100 of the male students wearing ankle shackles, while some also had their hands or feet chained to cow wheel rims. Other photos show the torture victims looking dazed and with horrific scars and blisters on their backs. The bodies showed that not only had these students been regularly beaten or flogged, but they seemed to have also been purposely starved for some days or being underfed. When the authorities began to free those that had been shackled or hung on the rooftops, they would begin to question some of the boys on what was happening within the school, and that was when more horrifying details would be revealed. You see, from the general sense of what was understood at the time, the police forces had discovered hundreds of them who were being housed, had a large number of them being stuffed or packed into very small, filthy-looking rooms where they were regularly subjected to torture, essay, and starvation. Also, the students whom spoke different languages were of different nationalities, ranging from the African countries of Burkina Faso, Mali, Ghana, Chad, and Niger Republic, and many other neighboring African countries. Even, according to a 42-year-old victim, a man by the name of Bello Hamza, who had spent 3 months all chained up in his legs, he spoke of how he came to be within the 4 walls of the boarding school. According to him, he was tricked into coming to the center by his family, who were interested in taking over the shares of his inheritance or property. In his words, he would say, and I quote, "I spent 3 months here with chains on my legs. I'm supposed to be pursuing my master's in the University of Pretoria, South Africa. I got admission to study applied mathematics, but here I am, chained. They claim to be teaching us Quran and Islam, but they do a lot of things here. They subject the younger ones to homosexuality. This is supposed to be an Islamic center, but trying to run away from here attracts severe punishment. They tie people and hang them to the ceiling for that, but engaging in homosexuality attracts no punishment. Within my short stay here, somebody had died as a result of torture. Others had died before my coming due to poor health and torture. They give us very poor food and we only eat twice a day, 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. They have denied me a lot of things here. I'm a family man, I have responsibilities, but I'm chained here, not knowing what is happening to my family members."
Look at, they put chain on me with all the level of my exposure. One, look at my own age. I have responsibilities on my head, but they deny me access to a lot of things.
Some of us are diabetic.
Okay, this man is diabetic and is a PhD holder.
Almost 2 years now. No
He's-
Okay, seeking education is supposed to be a voluntary thing.
yes.
Why are you changed?
I was chained. I don't know exactly why I was chained. I even complained to one of my cousin that was even here yesterday to say one or two things here to us. He was telling me that they used to hang people up there, in the next building there. They used to hang people whenever they built them. So we always discuss every day. Whosoever you see, some days back, just 17 children just left there.
The painful words of Mr. Bello showed a man who had already given up hope of finding his way out of the torture dungeon, which had been masquerading as an Islamic school, showing that this facility served as a slavery house used by sinister people who look to unjustly offload a family member or someone they hate or even rivals. In return, they pay the school for such services. Of course, this is my own theory, judging from the words of Mr. Bello, who seemed quite educated. He also revealed that previous students had been tortured to such an extent that their body couldn't withstand the horrifying treatment, which resulted to their death. And not only have the younger living ones been tortured, they had also been sodomized by the staffs, all in a bid to subdue them and satisfy their own depraved sexual urges within the all-male facility. And those who resisted were met with orders for the guards to severely punish them into submission. It's really a hellish condition for a human to pass what these young boys and men went through, all in the name of religion.
Dr. Hassan Yusuf.
Doctor?
Hassan Yusuf, yeah.
Doctor, are you a medical doctor?
PhD, Energy Economics.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why are you here?
They said I became a Christian because I spent 16 years in the UK. I married there. So I got back to Nigeria to come and settle with my family. And the extended family came and told these people that I became a Christian. I've converted. I'm trying to convert my children to Christians and the rest. I just found myself here one morning, about 2 years ago.
About 2 years?
Yeah.
Okay, what has been your experience in 2 years of being
Very hectic. Since I was in military school, I've not seen anything like this. I went to military school, so since that experience, I've not seen anything like this. And this is worse because of the age. I'm diabetic, no drugs. They keep you incommunicado. You can't talk to anybody to bring drugs or medicine for your diabetes. So I've just been surviving. These small boys, there are some small boys around that live around here. They're the ones that get us this zogale to chew and soak and drink. That's how I've been surviving with the diabetes. The food is just carbohydrates, the same thing every day, stones.
Following the brutal discovery, the owner of the school, together with 6 of the teachers, would be arrested. And despite acknowledging that some of their students were in chains, the owner insisted that all they do is to teach people Islam, while claiming that the allegations of SA were all false. For the torture, according to the arrested owner and the staff of 6 Islamic teachers, all they do is to recite the Quran, pray and worship God. For the chained ones, they insisted that only the ones who attempted to run away from the school were chained. This statement doesn't even make sense, at least to me, because why would you subdue someone against their own will when they clearly don't want to be a part of a system that oppresses them and violates every fundamental human right they have? Why would such a person escape? And why would an Islamic school be accused by many of its student victims of being forcefully essayed by their teachers, especially when it comes to an institution with all sorts of shady dealings to wrongfully detain people? It makes it all the more obvious that these allegations were obviously true, even with the strong denial by these shameful so-called teachers and the owner.
This place is neither a rehab or an Islamic school because you can see it with yourself. Small children, some of them are brought from our neighboring countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, Ghana and the rest. And the children gathered here are from all over the country, across all over the country. They were here, some of them were even chained. They were used, dehumanized, You can see it yourself.
So you've who are the people responsible for this? And from your interaction or gathering, what could be the reason or the brain behind putting these people together?
Well, the man who is operating this so-called rehab or an Islamic school claimed that the parents brought their children here for rehab. But from the look of things, this is not a rehab. So from there, we will evacuate everybody to our police station. Then make an announcement. Parents should come and take their children. We'll investigate later. The man, if he's found wanting with his other cahoos or co-conspirators, we'll arraign him in court.
Right.
So what's happening to parents sending their children to places like this?
That actually send it to them.
A reasonable and right-thinking parents will not bring his child to this place. Maybe they never know what is even going on here. If you come here and see how your child is treated here, I don't think if you bring your child here as a reasonable person.
It was a brutal scene, to say the least, and listening as the local state police chief described these young boys and men's condition as dehumanizing was horrific. They were being used as human slaves, stating that the owner of the school had claimed that parents from across and outside the country do bring their children over at the center for rehabilitation. But this seemed to contradict what was being seen, as no reasonable parents would bring their children to a place where they would be treated in the worst way possible. And even if that was to be the case, no parents would have loved to hear that their child has been stolen by who was meant to be trusted as a teacher. However, after the raid, hundreds of the detained students were later released into the house of torture by the Nigerian authorities in Kaduna State. They were taken out to be properly looked after and to be documented to determine where each of them came from. Now remember, many of them came from different countries across Africa, and so this process was done to properly identify and inform each of their parents to unite with them. Of course, some of the parents who came over the following days were shocked and horrified when they saw the condition of their children who they thought were being taken care of. Now remember, these parents were restricted in the way they communicated with their kids during their visiting days. Many of them had no idea of what was happening within the school, as they were mostly supervised by the school guards whenever they wished to see a family. They had always thought that their children, all looking defeated or quiet whenever they come to visit every 3 months, meant they were really learning how to become religious and behave socially. It wasn't until one of the students who couldn't be silent anymore or overcame his fears began to raise concerns, the complaints being on what they were passing through. And it was when rumors began to spread among the local residents would the eventual report be made and the horrors confirmed, especially for many locals who either suspected or had always knew of such treatment but had failed to earlier report due to one reason or another. Now, while some of the parents who had been contacted will soon be informed to reunite with some of their children after they had been transferred to a transit camp, medical and psychological help would also follow in the days after to help most of them who had gone through a lot, either physically, emotionally, and psychologically. In fact, this whole situation, although it didn't draw a lot of attention across the country, drew attention across the state as it raised concerns over similar Islamic schools across the northern part of the country, as these victims, which included both adults and minors, were kept in the most debasing and inhumane conditions, all in the name of teaching them the Quran and reforming them into becoming better and responsible humans, while illegally detaining, starving, essaying, and physically assaulting these so-called students of theirs at the slightest provocation, especially the minors, and some as young as 5 years old. An investigation began almost immediately across every Islamic school within the region to determine the true nature of how some of these Islamic schools operate and how far this type of activities had gone. It was during this further operation that the police authorities in Kaduna State would enter into a much bigger rabbit hole.
Now, authorities in Nigeria say they have rescued 300 captives, mainly children in chains, from a building in the city of Kaduna.
Well, first of all, this is quite a disturbing discovery.
As investigation began across every Islamic school within the region, within a month after the first raid, on October 14, 2019, another Islamic school in another northern Nigerian state called Katsina, in a town called Sabongarin, 67 miles away from Rigasa, where the first school was situated. This second Islamic school, aged more than 40 years, which was being run by a 78-year-old Muslim cleric, had over the past few days before the raid had more than 300 inmates protesting against the inhumane treatment, and whilst majority escaped the facility, 67 of the student victims who came from various parts of the country, including the neighboring country Niger Republic, remained behind. From months to years, they have also been slaves to the religious system, and they would be rescued, while most of them were also found in chains. Groups of 40 people, all kept in chains within unhygienic rooms of 7 square meters cell. All the while, dirty clothes and bedding littered the floor. And to make the situation so severe, those who lived there were often forced to urinate and defecate with their chains on, in the same place they ate and slept. They had also been physically and emotionally abused, while some also revealed being surprised by their teachers. It would also turn out that just like the first school, that this school had enrolled students who were brought in by their families to learn the Quran, and for some who were being treated for drug addiction and other ailments, or maybe for the delinquents, just like the Daru Imam school. Why the students would be rescued? Unfortunately, the owner and his teachers would escape from the scene. Few days after more than 300 men and boys were freed from this second school, a third raid would occur in an Islamic state within the same northern state of Katsina, where the police authorities would free about 500 men and boys from the Islamic school, many of whom had been chained to walls, molested, and violently beaten. Possibly, more schools were also raided in the days after, and thousands of more of these men and boys who thought they had been Islamic students were freed from their bondage, and more arrest was also made. Strangely, hundreds of young girls and women wasn't also spared, as on November 2019, some of them who had been malnourished and also abused would be rescued from these so-called religious institutions, which seem to seldom admit both sexes. 15 young children aged between 2 to 10 years old would also be rescued on July 2020. So, almost a year after the initial raids, they had also been chained, abused, tortured, and kept in dehumanizing conditions. Fortunately, the 46-year-old owner of the school would be prosecuted. It would also turn out that the so-called Islamic schools, which should rightfully be called houses of torture around the northern part of the country, were never licensed to run any sort of reformatory or educational program, even though the so-called owners and so-called teachers of these hellholes insisted they were licensed to do so. Hence, many people around the country who heard this horrible story would ask why such barbaric dungeons do exist, and many would start asking questions on whether if there was really an organized group behind the operation of these so-called boarding houses. Was a political or influential figure behind this house of horrors? The locals demanded answers, but in a country like Nigeria, where the justice system can be rigged, it's still not clear if these evil people ever fully faced the wrath of the law. Until this day, there is no telling whether the ones who escaped were ever caught. We just have to hope they were, and at least faced some degree of justice.
Every day they will give me 30 lashes, 10 in the morning, 10 in the afternoon, and 10 in the night.
This story goes to show how easy people within plain sight can commit evil under the guise of religion. And it's important to mention that these types of religious crimes do occur daily within any other religion. The aim of this video is to tell the horrors that can occur using the name of religion, a disturbing reality which occurs across the globe. And what makes this especially disturbing is the fact that this modern type of slavery, which had occurred centuries and decades ago, isn't now a racial concern, and it still continues to low-key happen in the 21st centuries within different countries, and not just in Africa, making people like me wonder what other manner of evil had befallen the innocent victims of other Islamic houses, which might have been kept secret till this day. These were just young boys and men, and while some of them might have a troubled upbringing or had grown in an unfortunate environment, or those who might have been innocent, as in the case of Bello, whom I had earlier read out how he was sold out by his own family for material gains. This story also brings into question the spiritual aspect of the school, who had claimed to teach the Islamic faith to their student victims.
We are not even praying. Don't think of we are here brought to read Quran. We are not praying. The owner of the house used to pick 2 or 3 people that he needs to rape. That's what he wanted. He will use you and he will still dump you back to the house. If you didn't comply with what he wishes, he will tell the guards that are living in the house to torture you. So this place is a hell. There are many experiences that we experience in this house. The experience of hunger, the experience of deprivation, the experience of inhumanity, the experience of molestation, the experience of... I don't know how to say it. My words cannot express what exactly happened.
It is well known by Muslims or the Islamic religion that homosexuality is strongly prohibited because the God Allah, who is regarded as the Almighty, prohibits it, as it is established by the text of the Holy Quran that the gay sexuality is seen as evil, mainly because it is believed in the religion that it hinders reproduction. Now, this is me stating what is written in this religious scripture in reference to this story and not as my own general view. I'm relating it to this story due to several allegations of essay which the boys had accused the older teachers of committing. How could someone who claims to teach the Islamic faith also go against such faith to commit the same evil that the same Quran they revere is against? Indeed, Allah's words obviously never meant anything to them, proving that this was a detention camp for exploitation and never an Islamic school to teach the faith, or a rehabilitation center for the drug addicted, the petty criminals, or the violent ones. In the dark world we live in, considering what is currently happening to 2 very religious countries, the Israelites and the Palestinian Hamas, 2 nations who had killed over not just lands, but also their holy religions as Jewish and Muslims respectively. Today's story goes to show how religious content can be used as everyday catalyst for all sorts of violent action, and why different religions can be viewed as a religion of peace. At the end of the day, it's used for various behavior, whether the righteous or sickening ones had always relied heavily on human interpretation. Of course, it can never be right to abuse, forcefully surprise and kill a fellow human, all in the name of God or Allah or any other supreme being worshipped. But it should be known by all people that it's time to let go of pretensions that anyone really knows the will of God. In other Islamic countries such as Pakistan, where thousands of Islamic schools known as madrasas are present and with a significant number of them being unregistered, essay is also a persistent problem, just like that from northern Nigeria. And in a culture where these clerics or teachers have some sort of authoritative power, and essay seems to be a taboo subject, it seems to be seldom discussed or even acknowledged in public, especially due to the fear of the militant religious organizations who seem to support such acts. The weapons used to threaten the critics of such acts being a controversial blasphemy law that carries a death penalty in the case of a conviction, which ultimately makes justice rare, a situation which can be compared to the abuse of children by some Christian priests. However, what makes a little different is that unlike the Catholic Church, which has a clear hierarchy topped by the Vatican, there is no central religious authority that governs these madrasas. There is also no central body that investigates or responds to allegations in such religious schools, making such abuse harder to prevent, which is a very disturbing situation. In some Muslim countries such as Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Central Sudan, Northern Nigeria, and other Islamic countries all over the world, these acts are even more seldom prosecuted, and with the police being paid off not to pursue justice against such crimes, leaving the victims and their families to live with the indelible mark, and which continues to negatively affect their life. Hence, the legal systems from most of these Islamic states would put the victim's family in a position where all they have to do is to forgive the court offender and accept what is often referred to as, in quote, blood money, leaving the victims and their families, who are usually poor and powerless, to lick their own wounds. Some victims have also gone on to take their own life, especially the ones who can't seem to live with the trauma. Hence, it's best if the government and authorities of such Islamic states or countries impose laws to see such depraved sex offenders masquerading as symbols of authorities to be severely punished, which would help reduce and deter others from doing same to these poor young kids. But always, these pedophile clerics are always set free, potentially leaving the door open to seek after more victims, as is usually the case. You see, it is best said that the enemy of peace is not religion, but those who pursue acts of horror against the innocent in the name of religion. No religion allows for immoral activities. We as humans have to reform our attitudes and not religion. And ever since the crackdown in the states across Nigeria, many more houses of torture that had been investigated and found guilty of such offense had their facilities shut down. And like I said before, whether some of them face the consequences of their actions still remains unknown. But it's best to assume that these cycles are always left unpunished, or at least with a minimum punishment, which is always a slap on the wrist of the victims and their family who have to endure. There is also a possibility that there are more of such schools operating secretly, hence which have not yet been uncovered. And if that's the case, it's only a matter of time before the dark secrets come to light. It's also worthy to note that the Almajirancis or Islamic school system in Nigeria is highly controversial. It has been attacked on several occasions for promoting youth poverty and delinquency, and also for failing to teach the Almajiris or these young boys vocational skills, and thus making them unequipped for the workforce, and for radicalizing boys and making them perfect culprits for gangs and other notorious violent groups such as the Boko Harams. But on the other hand, some had always believed that the system teaches young boys to be pious, good people who would benefit society.
There's no mistaking the hunger for education here in Kano in the north of Nigeria. These classrooms absolutely packed every day, and outside them you even find children who are not enrolled, who will put their ear to the door trying to get ahead, get a bit of an education. But there's a huge problem here in the north of Nigeria in that some 11 million children are believed to be not getting any basic education. Many of them are getting a religious education, but they're not getting the kind of classes that you get in a regular primary or secondary school. So here in this part of Kano, there's a mixture of lessons going on. Religious education with all the kinds of classes you get in a regular school. So here they're learning English, the present continuous tense. Let's hear some of the present continuous tense. The present continuous, now we are jumping. Over here we've got a maths class going on, going through all the drills of the numbers.
To leave this story on a slight positive note, over the past decades, the federal government of the country had registered, introduced mathematics, natural science, and English language classes into the curriculum of 12 state pilot schools in the northwest state of Kano and also other northern states. To recognize such initiatives on an international scale, the United Kingdom Cooperation Agency had also allocated over 142 million euros into such schools. But only a majority of children ever benefit from these exceptional conditions, especially due to the amount of corruption and money laundering within the country. Since the discovery of such houses of torture, in an effort to control how these Almajiri schools operate in the state, there were also fears that more uneducated youths could end up as recruits or groups like Boko Haram. Hence, some governments have also introduced a law banning parents from sending their children away for religious education without offering them at least some financial support and making sure that they were employable as they grow. This was also done so they can better be equipped with the challenges of a modern society and not fall for the deadly correlation between illiteracy, poverty, and conflict within the region. Various state governments would also set to officially register and regulate those Islamic schools and revamp some aspect of the system. And while some of the northern states had already introduced Western education to go side by side with Islamic education, a lot more still needs to be done to help provide both more of the young boys and girls easy access to be properly reformed without being subjected to a twisted part of Islamism. Also, some of the state government has stated having well-equipped medical facilities to provide the rehabilitation needed for drug abuse or mental disorders, but with parents still turning to centers that say they do rehabilitate people in the name of Islam, it is safe to say that these governments really have no capacity to deal with the problem. And with no concrete alternatives, sadly, till this day, desperate families keep on returning to these religious centers for solutions. As for the victims in this story, some of them were reluctant to go home to their families, and some had ever since carried on with their lives in different parts of the country, including those who had gone back to their own country following the incident. May they all find peace from the horrors and the trauma they all had to endure. I hope they find all the help they need for a better life, whether within or outside the religious environment, and they solely remain focused in this story.